What now for Myanmar, where it's back to power for the junta that never quite went away when it handed over to civilian rule 5 years ago, and back to jail or house arrest for Aung San Suu Kyi and the leaders of the Nobel Peace Laureate's National League for Democracy, the NLD, which was just coming off a landslide win in a general election marked by 70% turnout. Why now for a power grab that, depending on how it plays out, will show the extent or limits of popular support through the ballot box in one of Asia's poorest nations? We'll also be asking about the forces at play, both domestically and abroad. It's the first coup since the inauguration of a new U.S. president who has pledged to restore Washington's support for democracy around the globe. Already, the likes of the UK and neighboring India have condemned the coup. Will the international community act with renewed vigor? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking about that coup d'etat in Myanmar. And joining us, Myanmar human rights activist Aung Zarni. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you.
He's France's former ambassador to Myanmar. Jean-Michel Lacombe is with us from Paris. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And pleasure to welcome back David Cameron, Honorary Senior Research Fellow and Adjunct Professor at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. My pleasure. Nice to see you. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, this was supposed to be the day that Myanmar's parliament certified the general election results. Instead, the swelling rumors that the military wasn't going to accept the result, well, proved true. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has more.
An uneasy calm in Yangon as Myanmar's commercial capital wakes up to news of a power grab by the army. But signs of disquiet are on the streets, a heavy police and military presence as people queue at banks and ATMs to access their cash. Later, truckloads of military supporters drove through the streets, waving flags and playing the national anthem. In the capital, Naypyidaw, surveillance helicopters hovered and armoured vehicles blocked off major roads close to government buildings. Earlier, internet and mobile networks had been temporarily cut off. Rumours of a coup had been simmering for days and were confirmed when former General Min Tsui appeared on national television reading from a statement. The military has declared a state of emergency for a year, citing, quote, electoral fraud over the results of November's elections. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy party won a landslide 80% of parliamentary seats in that vote. The army has called on the Electoral Commission to investigate so-called voter irregularities. Suu Kyi herself was detained on Monday morning. Using social media channels, she called on the Burmese people to protest against the coup, which she says is an attempt to reinstall a military dictatorship. Indeed, many see this takeover as the end of Myanmar's fledgling democracy, despite the compromises and concessions of the last decade.
David Cameron, we started to see noises over the weekend or even last week. Were you surprised, though?
Not really. I mean, the original sin goes back to 2008 when the new constitution was introduced. For the military, that was all that was going to happen in terms of democracy. Whereas for people in the National League for Democracy, that was to be the beginning of something, and that eventually the constitution needed to be changed. And that the military's role in political life would be reduced. And it's perhaps also those that talk of a constitutional change, which has been in the air for years, and also the crushing victory of Aung San Suu Kyi in the last elections, and the crushing defeat of the military-backed USDP, which showed that playing politics for the military was not going to work. So let's go back to what we know, which is repression.
Okay, so let me follow your logic, David Cameron, and I'll put it to Aung Zarni. You've just lost badly in legislative elections. You've proved your unpopularity, so you stage a coup?
Well, I think that is obviously what has taken place, and I very much agree with the gentleman from Sciences Po. But there are a number of factors we also need to consider. One is that, the Burmese democratic transition was never really genuine democratic transition. I think the military has made its intention and rationale very, very clear from the get-go. In the constitution, the Burmese democracy was not to be a liberal democracy, functioning democracy. It was supposed to be, in the military's language, disciplined, flourishing democracy. The military in the constitution puts itself above the law, above the society, above the popular will. In Chapter 9, there are 9 pages devoted to articulating the rationales and elaborate steps as to when the military will take power or back from the civilian government anytime that the commander-in-chief decides that the civilian government poses a threat to stability, national sovereignty, security, and all that sort. And so I think the military is, in their own eyes, doing the assigned job of disciplining the MPs from NLD that, according to the military and USDP, have ignored widespread voter frauds. This is like a Trumpian discourse. The only difference is the contexts are radically different. In the United States, Donald Trump can come up with this argument and stop the steal thing, and then got booted out because there are institutions and there are cultures, and particularly the Pentagon stood firm against Donald Trump's power grab. In the case of Burma, the democracy has never taken off the ground, although we have been fed this lie that Burmese democracy is fragile and transition is fragile. And that was killed today by the very military itself.
Jean-Michel Lacombe, you agree that we've lost the link to Ambassador Lacombe. We'll try to reconnect there, but I'll put it to you then, David Cameron. Was it a lie? Is it a lie if I talk about democratic transition?
It is, to use the terms of one political scientist, my colleague Renoué Grito, a caretaker democracy, or a tutelatory democracy. The military put itself as their traditional role is they are the only custodians of national unity. They are the only body, in their view, that can assure national unity. So we have, as just been said, this disciplined, flourishing democracy is one which is under the control of the military, which have 25% of the seats in Parliament, the key ministries of the frontier, the interior, and defence. And it was always a hybrid regime with this sharing of roles. The problem is
it even could raise the question that was the coup itself legal under the rules that were established?
It was legal under the rules established, and the language used, and this is where I think they've learned from the Thai generals, is that they're performing a coup supposedly to defend democracy against electoral fraud and to re-establish the democracy that, according to the constitution that they initiated in 2008.
We have Ambassador Lacombe back. Your thoughts, Jean-Michel Lacombe, on the fact that this democracy, when it was established, was it always going to be headed this way, or could history have been written differently?
Well, I think that the result of the last election must have come as a shock to the military. And he has put them in a difficult position because with that landslide victory, there was clearly an opportunity with the new parliament to try to change slightly, but nevertheless try to change the constitution. Because as it has been mentioned before, this constitution is very difficult to change. Key postings are given only to military. Their budget is not voted in parliament. The military are still very much in charge. So when they got the results, first they said that the Central Electoral Commission did not do its job properly. Then they decided to cancel. They wanted to stop the convening of the new parliament. And running short of time, well, they decided to go back to the old traditional methods, which I've tasted when I was posted there.
And this new man in charge that we're hearing about, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, what more do we know about him?
Well, he was not among the ones who were ruling the country when the junta was in charge. It was a man called Tan Shui, and the kind of opposition was led by Kim Yunt, that was inside the junta. Kim Yunt was pragmatic, and he thought it was necessary to inject some kind of democracy, or to make an effort to present a better face to the outer world. But Kim Yunt disappeared, Tan Shui retired, Min Aung Hlaing was one of the generals. He was among the 12 because they have a vetting system, the junta, which is to reach the junta, the first step is head of a brigadier of a light division infantry. Then you are given a part of the territory. And then if you are very good and give services to the junta, then you join the junta. Otherwise, you retire as an ambassador or as head of one of the many companies which are controlled by the junta.
So now the question, I'll put it to you, Maung Zarni, is will the junta get away with it?
Oh, it will get away with it because, like when we talk about the coup or democratization, whether it was full-fledged or disciplined, flourishing, in the junta's term, I think we are still talking only 30% of the Burmese realities. There are two other distinct realities that need to be factored in. One is the decades-long genocidal persecution of Rohingya ethnic minorities that have been falsely portrayed as illegal, unwanted migrants, although they've been in the country, some for centuries, some for several generations, right? And that is the persecution that has landed Burma or Myanmar before the International Court of Justice that tries that gets involved in the legal conflicts between the state parties of the Genocide Convention and other treaties. And the other reality that needs to be discussed within this talk of democratization is that we are about 35% national minorities in Burma. I am from Buddhist Burmese dominant majority, and the gentleman who signed the coup announcement, ex-General Min Sui, was very much my mate in the old days when I was engaged with the military 15 years ago. And so the minorities, as we speak today, have been subjected to vicious military campaigns. The Korans and even Buddhist Rakhine's in Rakhine State are also, suffering, under this, internally colonial military repression. 40% of the country's minorities are subject to various degrees of brutal military and economic policies by the regime. And so I think those factors need to be discussed. And so that's why, one last point I want to make here is that. But hang on. Let me just ask you. Empirically.
Maung Zarni, let me ask you. You said at the outset there that the junta will get away with it. You haven't made the argument for it, since you just said to me, A, that they were unpopular at the polls, and B, that they've repressed a lot of a sizable minority of the population.
Yeah, I mean, there are two different, sources where the accountability for this blatant, even by the military's own standard, reversal of the social transformation, if you will, can come from. One is the public in Burma itself, and will they rise up to defend the limited democratic transition under Suu Kyi, as Suu Kyi herself has openly asked the public to do, which is that not to accept the coup and defend the democratic process. And the other is the international community. Well, Burma enjoys double veto from Russia and China. China is not the sole protector of Burma. Burma is not, the Burmese military, I should say, has never put all its eggs in a single basket, China or Russia or the West. And so, Security Council will never take any action. And we are looking at the so-called international community that has failed to end, genocide in Burma, and it cannot be expected to intervene to reverse this anti-democratic cause.
All right, that's from abroad, but what about domestically? What about domestically?
Regimes.
What about domestically?
Domestically, no. Domestically, I am going to argue that there is no chance that the Burmese public will rise up, and if they do, they will be brutally crushed. The military has shown it's very capable of crushing any peaceful uprisings since 1962.
Do you agree with that, David Cameron?
The only thing that I really hoped for was in the military itself, a division within the military. We've not seen that in 70 years. I think that the situation is a little bit different than previously in 1962 when the military took power, insofar as there is social media, there are ways of organizing. We saw that in 2008 in the demonstrations. But yes, the military has no compunction about resorting to repression to control the country. So I think what we will see is a kind of period of quiet, where people will go about their business feeling incredible resentment, but there's got to be a catalyst, in fact, for this movement to emerge. And with the arrest of the main leaders of Aung San Suu Kyi herself and the main leaders of the NLD, this is something which is rather difficult to imagine.
All right, when we come back, we're going to pick up on some of the points we broached there, most notably what happens to Aung San Suu Kyi and what does the international community do. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. A coup d'etat after 5 years of a democratic transition in Myanmar brings us back to, it's been 5 decades of military rule that preceded it. We're talking about it with, from London, Myanmar human rights activist Maung Zarni. Here in Paris, we are with France's former ambassador to that country, Jean-Michel Lacombe, and David Cameron, who is an honorary senior research fellow and adjunct professor at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Yeah, we talked about the military in part one. It's also back to detention for Aung San Suu Kyi, poster child in her day for pro-democracy movements the world over, but who had to compromise in her dealings with the military, particularly during that 2018 crackdown on minority Rohingya Muslims. Erika Gunke has more.
It's not for one person alone that we're in this movement for democracy. It's for all of us.
From staunch opponent of military dictatorship to a leader of a regime accused of genocide, the fate of Aung San Suu Kyi lies yet again in the hands of the military junta. Born in Yangon in 1945, she's the daughter of one of the heroes of the country's war for independence. She was just 2 years old when her father was assassinated. She studied in India and at Oxford in England, where she settled with her family.
In 1988, she returned to Yangon to care for her ailing mother, and it was then that she was swept up into politics, leading a pro-democracy movement in the midst of a brutal military repression. In 1989, she was placed under house arrest, refusing to leave the country in exchange for freedom. 2 years later, she earned the Nobel Peace Prize for her activism. She was freed in November of 2010 and elected to parliament in 2012.
We must seize the opportunity to reform the country. If we lose this opportunity, we'll go down in history as guilty.
Her persistence paid off in 2015 when her party won the majority in legislative elections. The following year, she became state councillor, co-leading the country with the military. But her silence over the persecution of the Rohingya minority stoked widespread international criticism. In 2017, some 700,000 Rohingya refugees were forced to flee to Bangladesh amid claims of ethnic cleansing, accusations Aung San Suu Kyi denied.
Periodically, trouble has broken out there between the Muslim community and the Rakhine community, and we have inherited this very complex problem, and we have to deal with it.
But her reputation in Myanmar went unscathed. Last November, her party secured yet another sweeping victory in parliamentary elections, prolonging Aung San Suu Kyi's mandate until the military junta seized power on February 1st.
So Jean-Michel Lacombe, there you have it. Aung San Suu Kyi, whose destiny has been linked to that of her country for decades. Your thoughts on how she'll come out of this new chapter?
Well, I think with such a staunch ally like China and the Russian Federation, I think it's going to be very difficult, and I hope that the population won't try to react in an unruly manner, because, as it has been said before, the army will not hesitate to shoot. Now, one thing which is not always mentioned, and it helps to understand the Chinese attitude. 70% of the Chinese oil is coming from the Gulf. It goes around India, through Malacca Strait, and then to China. China, at great expenses, has built two pipelines from Burma to China, and it's a short way to get their oil. The unloading port in Myanmar is Sittwe. That is exactly where the Rohingya population is living. So it's bang on target, and I think that China is quite determined to have peace restored in that part of Burma, because it is their lifeline, or in another way, it's a shortcut to get their oil and their gas.
A shortcut to get their oil and their gas. It was just 3 weeks ago that we saw China's foreign minister was in Myanmar. Wang Yi had met with President Win Myint, who himself now has been detained. Beijing, which has enjoyed strong relations with the NLD and sees Myanmar as an important player, as you mentioned. But let's listen to the statement we heard earlier in the day from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
中国是缅甸的友好邻邦，我们希望缅甸各方在宪法和法律框架下妥善处理分歧，维护政治和社会稳定。
All right, a cautious statement calling for calm and dialogue. Mong Zarni, I mean, the Chinese enjoyed good relations with Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD.
Yes, but what the
does,
Prime Minister is
but
saying...
you also have to understand...
They want
to understand that the...
Mong Zarni, go ahead.
Chinese interest in Burma and the bilateral relationship with Burma will continue no matter who's in charge, whether Aung San Suu Kyi or the generals, right? And because Burma, in the eyes of Beijing, is an integral part of its greater grand strategy. And, Burma is a very, very, perhaps the most strategic, place for China to project its naval power into the Indian Ocean. There are only two places where China can get access to Indian Ocean. One is Burma, and the other one is Pakistan. As the ambassador pointed out, the Chinese pipeline and also gas pipeline and the petrol pipeline are housed in Arakan State. But I think here what we need to understand is, as far as I can see, the military is going to never let Aung San Suu Kyi hold any office ever again. She is 75, 76 years old, and her position, Myanmar State Councillor office, was never a part of Myanmar constitution. The generals felt they had been outfoxed legally by Aung San Suu Kyi and a lawyer. So I think today is the beginning of the end of Aung San Suu Kyi's political career. No matter what happened to NLD, what happened is that basically the generals decided that every time they attempted to play with Aung San Suu Kyi in this so-called democracy game, she always beats them. This is Thai junta and Thaksin scenario. And then we know what happened to Thaksin and his associates in Thailand. Thaksin's in exile, and Thaksin's associates are never allowed to form political parties again. That is what I fear the military is going to do to both the NLD party and Aung San Suu Kyi.
Do you agree with that, David Cameron?
I think it is a very pessimistic view, but I think it is probably a correct view that she's almost a victim of her own success. For example, with the COVID pandemic, it was the civilian authorities who dealt with it. The military tried to, but it's basically the civilian authorities. So that made her even more popular. So her popularity is a real threat. She's a pole of legitimacy. In Burmese term, we call that a minlung, a kind of righteous queen, that is in conflict with the military's claim that they are the only true custodians of national unity. And I think one of the great errors of Aung San Suu Kyi, which is exaggerated by the electoral system, was that the minority ethnic groups were not really brought in to the government and to the administration. The states get, I think, about 7% of the budget. So there was never a proper federal system instituted. The military opposed that anyway and kept control in many areas as they could.
Yeah, that was the point made in part one of our discussion by Maung Zarni, which is that the needs of the minorities, the rights of the minorities, particularly the Rohingya Muslims, were ignored or stifled.
Yes, and that, in a sense, was turned against her because a political support which would go beyond the Burma majority. And also amongst the Burma majority, the military also played on the emergence of this kind of Buddhist chauvinism we've seen, which has encouraged all these campaigns against the Muslims. I noticed that today one of the only people to actually be satisfied with the coup was a monk, one of these Buddhist Buddhist chauvinist monks. And the military sort of played into that. The military commander within his own Facebook page, playing that they are also the defenders of true Burma Buddhist nationalism.
All right, we were talking about international reactions. We mentioned China. Let's talk about the United States, where there has been a new president now for a little under 2 weeks now. And it's taken a strong stance. First, there was a tweet by the new Secretary of State early when the coup happened, and now a statement coming from Joe Biden himself. The United States taking note of those who stand with the people of Burma in this difficult hour, we will work with our partners throughout the region and the world to support the restoration of democracy and the rule of law, as well as to hold accountable those responsible for overturning Burma's democratic transition. Jean-Michel Lacombe, the fact that it's Joe Biden and not Donald Trump in the White House, will that make any difference at all for Myanmar?
I think, unfortunately, that the new American president has plenty on his plate for the time being without turning the full might of his country toward the problems of Myanmar. And this brings me, like I suppose everybody participating in this conversation, I had phone calls from Burma. I made some phone calls, and I think the situation is pretty difficult for some people, and especially the binationals, which the junta do not recognize, especially if they are militants and linked outside. The road to the airport is closed, and the house arrests have started. And I think this is going to be a difficult time.
David Cameron, you were saying on this issue of whether the U.S. will make a difference or not?
Certainly, rhetorically, they'll make a difference, because this is basically a gift for Joe Biden, to be cynical. He's talked about this summit for democracy. He's now got a case where he can differentiate himself from the Trump administration. You know, the U.S. in Asia is going to defend human rights and democracy. Now, I agree with the ambassador that that may have very little impact within Myanmar itself, but it will certainly have an impact in the region more generally and with the countries of ASEAN, now that we have an American leadership who've put back in their priorities the defense of human rights and democracy. But whether that will bring about any change in Myanmar itself, I mean, the question is also, in a sense, I feel that the junta shot itself in the foot. I mean, the whole deal with Aung San Suu Kyi was that she would open up the country, she would make a respectable player on the international scene, and that would bring in investment, that would bring in foreign aid. And she's been very successful in doing that. Now, it will be actually the reactions of investors which will have some impact rather than the declarations of politicians.
Yeah, Maung Zarni, can Myanmar afford to become a pariah state again? Do you agree with David Cameron?
I think it can, because the military has endured like 20 years of rather stringent sanctions from the United States and European Union, and then I was involved in building that grassroots sanction campaign, which resulted in the policy toughening towards Burma. And then so this is the military that will not respond any longer to Western pressure coming, because there are no other places in the world where the democracy will be taken seriously and Democrats will be given solidarity and support. So, but as much as I respect the Biden administration vis-a-vis former far-right white supremacist Trump administration, I think the American words are going to sound hollow, and also we are looking at the region where like a democracy is not a not a distinct feature. I mean, look at ASEAN country, 10 countries. Only 2 could be nominally called, democratic, like Indonesia and Malaysia. The rest of the ASEAN bloc, including Singapore, are different types of authoritarian regimes. And look at Thailand. I mean, India is going far right with the Hindu fundamentalism. And so what we are seeing is a situation where Democrats cannot count on the United States that changes the regime every 4 to 8 years, whereas in fact, dictatorship and authoritarian and autocratic regimes can count on the support of regimes like Beijing or Moscow.
News of the coup, by the way, prompting rallies outside Myanmar's embassies and consulates, including Bangkok, which, as we've been mentioning, has been in the throes of its own power struggle between activists and the military. We can perhaps, David Cameron, show some of those images earlier. There were a few scuffles outside in Bangkok. Is it a case of people projecting? And there you see them. There you see those images. Is it a case of people there projecting, or again, it brings back to what you were saying about this idea of a summit to talk about democracy?
Well, I think perhaps the military were a little bit concerned with what is occurring in Thailand. And, the young people are incredibly frustrated with the situation in Thailand. So there may be a fear amongst the Burmese military that could occur in Myanmar itself. But, the only thing that the military has always known is repression. Their attempt with their political party to try and play the democratic game has not succeeded. So, they'll return to what they know. And as has just been mentioned by Aung San Suu Kyi, is that they're in a favorable situation. I mean, what brought about the changes in the 90s actually was the changes in the rest of Southeast Asia with the end of the Suharto dictatorship in Indonesia. And that created a more favorable situation to put pressure on Myanmar before it joined ASEAN and then a little bit afterwards to at least have the facade of democracy. Now that they're in and they're protected, the non-interference in the affairs of member countries, they've had their cake and eaten it too.
Okay, but there is one ASEAN nation that has been outspoken this Monday, India. The foreign ministry putting out a statement squarely denouncing the coup. Quote, India has always been steadfast in its support to the process of democratic transition in Myanmar. We believe that the rule of law and the democratic process must be upheld, end quote. Ambassador Lacombe, India's tack, what is it in this instance?
Well, I vividly remember the Indian ambassador telling me, Jean-Michel, we are out of democratization business. I mean, the interest of India now is to have a good relation with whoever in charge and try to forget about that unfortunate incident. They want to have a direct link to Southeast Asia.
Well, then why the strong statement?
Well, that's the least they can do.
Yeah, exactly.
As far as the Western declaration are concerned, everybody has the feeling that we must not make the same mistake as before. The American chargé was telling me, we have sanctioned us out of Burma, and the junta is not reacting, and the best would be to engage. So I think we are going to have a lot of strong declaration, but unfortunately, and this is why I'm thinking about my friends in Burma, unfortunately, there won't be any results.
Maung Zarni, one final question. I'll put it to you because we're almost out of time. You heard earlier Jean-Michel Lacombe talk about the conversations he's had this Monday with people inside of Myanmar and what they've been telling him. Have you spoken to people there?
Oh, yeah. I have been in regular touch with some of my friends and fellow activists on the ground, but not today, obviously. But the people, I mean, the civil society has become far more diverse, and the more critical segment of civil society activism have become extremely disillusioned with Aung San Suu Kyi and her autocratic style of leadership. And then she came from a grassroots. She was swept into popularity by student activists and other, including ex-military activists in her party in the early days. And she turned her back against those who are intelligent and who are critical of anyone, and she does not embrace the strong civil society movement. I think she is reaping the fruit of what she has shown, because she has become a part of a fairly repressive structure vis-a-vis the civil society itself.
Yeah, and that civil society, you're saying, is still strong inside of Myanmar, despite everything that's going on. I want to thank you, Maung Zarni, for joining us from London. I want to thank as well Jean-Michel Lacombe, David Camroux. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.